Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast with me, Moses Kemibaro. My guest today is none other than Mark Kaigwa, the founder and CEO of Nendo, an insights digital marketing agency, training organization, and of course, he'll describe it in much better words than I. But somebody who we've really known from the very early days of what I'd call the digital universe here in Kenya and the rest of East Africa. Mark is somebody that I've probably known for at least the last 15 years, since the early days when he was running a business and a platform called Afri-Innovator. But over the years, we've always had incredible banter, conversations, and in-depth passions for things around data and insights around the space of social media, digital marketing, and generally digital media at large. It's such a pleasure to have him here today, and it's something that I've been wanting to do for a really long time. And I'm really hoping that Mark is going to be able to unpack a lot of insights around what is happening in this space within Kenya, East Africa, and across the African continent. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Happy to be here, Moses. I think we've come a long way from Twitter back in those days and what we call the E63 Club.
Yeah, I imagine that, the Nokia E63 Club. I remember there was a whole bunch of us guys who had that phone.
Yeah.
And it was really at the beginnings of social media, as I recall, right?
It was, I think, maybe 2010.
Yeah.
And the BBC had some people from their tech show in town.
Yes.
They put the call out.
Yes.
And then people show up from the sort of Twitter tech community. And then we all look in each other's like palms and we're like, hold up, you have an E63, I have an E63.
I remember that vividly.
Bobby Muirigi had one, a bunch of other guys. And of course, the famed legend goes that that's when the E63 Club started.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's like a while ago, huh? It's a while ago.
It is.
But honestly, that was pretty much, I think, one of the first times that I encountered you. But Mark, I'm really keen to maybe peel away the layers and get your origin story. Who's Mark? Where do you come from? Where did you get this passion and curiosity for data and insights? I'm sure there's some interesting story behind all of that, and I'd love you to tell us that.
Sure. I think for me, it's definitely part of my upbringing. I think that the household that I grew up in, I'm a firstborn of two.
Oh, okay.
But my brother looks more like the firstborn. He's anything I've dabbled with, He has absolutely dominated.
Wow.
And that's everything from music production. I used to make beats.
Oh, really?
He, to this day, makes beats professionally. He's a music producer.
Proper.
Yeah, proper.
But you guys then are creative. You're a creative family,
right.
yeah?
That's right. Yeah. So even my dad's side of the family.
Yes.
My late dad, even though he was in the military, that's a bit of his background. He would act partly because my aunt Mark Kaigwa, she is a thespian, an actress, a filmmaker, film impresario, many things within that domain. And my uncle, my late dad's younger brother, he is a practicing fine artist, sculptor. So if you ever went to the mall back in the days, the diving,
that was him.
That's his work.
God.
So, and then my mom is a former, but she still uses these skills, interior designer.
Wow.
So both sides of the family had an artistic persuasion. And so my brother and I were both encouraged and given the room to experiment, explore, get enthusiastic about things related to the arts. And yeah, that's definitely formed a part of even my mindset. My late dad used to be quite big into Apple computers, even in the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, so taught me how to touch type. Same for like my brother, like very early on. And so got us into technology.
So tech and creative concurrently.
That's right.
And
The
very
two
much at
together.
the core of your upbringing. That's
Correct.
Brilliant. But again, they also get a sense of storytelling. I'm almost suspect when I look at you, were you like a doodler maybe, or somebody who liked to build comics and stuff?
Yeah, I'm holding this iPad in my hand and I got I just showed you before you went on air, thousands of notes and always using just the mind-hand connection to try to, really, in a world where things can move so fast, especially with the written word, try to maintain that aspect of slowing down and doing things longhand every now and again.
Yeah. So tell me what happens when you draw a line from that point to presumably maybe university or college, maybe your first jobs. What was that like, and what is that line looking like in terms of progression?
Yeah, I think non-linear is the way I'd put it. I've had a very open, curious, particularly the first number of years where it was, I'd say, less structured and more guided just by the moment. So there's an analogy by Sani Bindra that he's the first person I heard it from, of what he described as either mountain people or river people.
Okay.
So the idea is that some people are more of a mountain person, which is this concept that, hey, I imagine you're at the top of a cliff, you look over the valley, you see out of the morning haze and mists. At sunrise, you see a mountain. In your mind, you say, I'm climbing that mountain. That's I'm getting to the peak. And it can take you weeks, months, or however long, but you get down, you meet a crevice, you go back, but you're always tracking back because you're looking up against that. So that's people, you could argue, with a 5-year plan, saying that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I have this and that and the other goal.
Yeah.
That was not how my life operated, either in the planning or even the situational awareness.
Yes.
The other opposite of that is what you would call a river person. Same exact place. The mountain is still in view, but they're looking sort of through the thicket of this valley for a glint of water, because wherever that is, that's where there's a stream or a brook or some sort of like river. That river will lead somewhere. Presumably the ocean or just somewhere. And all they do, get down there, fashion a canoe, and get in there and paddle as hard as they can. And that idea is probably a bit more of what the first decade of my professional life was like from uni, because it's not like... So I don't even have a degree, so to speak. So I was at Strathmore University, did a diploma in business and IT, dabbled with a number of things there, obviously including coding and business.
Yes, okay.
I didn't even choose that course. My parents chose it for me behind my back, and I give them a lot of credit. So I thought I'm coming to relax for a while.
Yeah.
Weeks later, we're like, I'm picking out clothes for very formal Strathmore University.
What?
That's right. And so I had hardly cooled my heels after Form 4, and I was out at Madaraka, staying in a bedsitter in South B, and essentially just trying to basically learn and adapt and get into this very similar to high school routine, to be fair. Yeah. So did that, and that is the only sort of foundational learning I've had of that kind. Since then, a lot of executive education. So more of sort of your business schools, your exec ed programs. But after Strathmore, went tamarking a bit. That didn't necessarily yield as much fruit. And then I went to a playwriting workshop. It was about that. So my aunt Mombi was holding this workshop with my uncle Keith Pearson, and together they'd brought in Hollywood theater writer called Roberta Levitau. I just said, hey, I'll be the KYM, right? Just send me for sugar, send me for tea. Let me just be a fly on the wall. 10 best playwrights in the room. I started obviously like just being the KYM. Soon enough, they're just like, you know what, dude, just sit and listen. And we won't just send you up and down for stuff. I meet someone there. I believe it's Robbie Bresson, maybe senior. And he, yes, Robbie Bresson. So he invites me. He just looks at me and says, you know what? After a couple of days, you seem to have a good head on your shoulders. Warner Brothers are in town. And he just says, come. So I arrived there. Warner Brothers were not expecting me. They don't know who I am. They don't even have a seat for me. So they just tell me, you know what, you wait outside the room for a bit. I wait outside. Eventually they say, okay, go stand in the back. But they have assembled all these writers in the room, and they say, you know what, we're here to talk about a video game. Everyone's like, video game? Talk about a movie, talk about a series, right? Talk about some sort of film related asset. That's who Warner Brothers is. But these guys had come from Warner Brothers Interactive. And it was part of a larger program within what's called PEPFAR, or the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief.
So this, I know PEPFAR, yes.
This multi-decade idea that said, what's the way to bet on the future of how young people are spending their time? And the idea was gaming, and specifically behavior change games. So again, they've not made any plans for me. Again, I don't have anywhere to sit. I didn't have a name card. I didn't have anywhere to sign. But by the end, I get everyone's contacts. I go to a cyber the week after, write them all emails. We used to do that. And then basically just, kujituma, as we say in Kenya, just, giving yourself the opportunity, trying to bet on yourself a bit. So they say, look, you've been persistent enough. We'll ask you to write a treatment, which is what they were asking all the other acclaimed writers. Not all of them responded. I did. And I was very shocked and extremely unqualified to hear, yep, you're going to help write this video game. You're the one that's going to help. Because I had played video games growing up, so I knew a number of things. I actually asked a number of questions on the day. And from that's probably more down to what you asked around the curiosity. And I'd even sum up probably the first maybe 7 years of my life professionally as being what Seth Godin likes to call very aligned to projects. So almost freelancing in different careers that people take a long time to do. Because I was not a video game writer, but I learned on the job. I'd never written animation, but I wrote 5 animated short films. I'd never been in a studio to direct voice talent. I did that, with celebrities at the time, out at Homeboys.
Wow.
The game went on to win awards. And then that opened my mind to technology, creativity, and really what I'd call this aspect of just being curious about Africans and how we see the world. Because this video game, for context, was what you call sandbox style. So you're navigating Nairobi, you have matatus, you have traffic, you have multiple non-playable
So
characters.
it's rooted in Kenyan
That's
culture.
right. And Sheng, like, I mean, at least at the time, somewhat deep Sheng, right? Like, so it had to be very authentic so people could see themselves in it. It's a story of 5 characters, a tout, an IT guy, a med student, a musician, and I forget who the 5th character was, but they're on a mat one evening. The mat gets robbed. They're not all from the same side of Nairobi, but they all have to come together to work to get their stuff back. So each of them has these different mini games, and along the way, they each have different levels of risk as far as their sexual and reproductive health. And so what you don't know is that you learn through them and their mistakes and challenges, but you don't necessarily know. Nothing's on the nose.
Yes.
And so it's very subtle, and you can play that game together. Certain games needed multiple people at the same time, and the graphics were amazing in my opinion, and it got put on like these flatbed trucks that travel the country. It was at cybers, and it was all over to just try to help people play a game for hours on end and discover their city themselves, but also walk through these narrative arcs around how we shift our behavior and our mindsets around our own levels of risk regarding sexual and reproductive health.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, we could
That's
go
a
on.
lot.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Wow. So what happens from that point onwards?
From that point, I have a bit of like a crisis. I was like, oh wow, it's my coolest project behind me now. But I meet Anthony Mwangi, otherwise known as Antonio Soul, because I was in a bit of like sort of the poetry circuit. It's something I picked up in university.
Yeah.
And so, we reconnected at a slam poetry event, and he says, oh, I work at this agency now, you should come. And so I go over, and he gets me the opportunity to audition in principle for a copywriter role. And I end up securing that. I spend some time at Brainwave, which is an agency that's still around to this day. June and Rio, the 2 owners.
Yeah, I know June, yeah.
Yeah, and brilliant minds. So they really gave me a wide berth, right? I don't think they expected me to last like a week. And I ended up staying a year and a half. And by a couple months in, I was, with their permission, leading a lot of their presentations. And really just helping captain the ship as I learned as I went. And sort of stayed curious, stayed humble, stayed hungry. And a lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings and late nights. That's where
agency life, huh?
Exactly, agency life. But that opened my mind up to working with creatives, working with artists, producing stories. And what's interesting is I also started a marketing column at the time. So William Colombo from Marketing Africa.
I remember, yes.
We would lay out the magazine, so I'd have to proofread it. And I was like, hey, William, you ain't got anybody here who's writing about social media. You got to give me some inches, right? Give me some space. And he gave me like a massive, what I thought word target at the time, 15 to 1,800 words. And I could show you, Moses, some of those articles today, they haven't aged a day.
They're still
so
relevant.
15 years, and it's like social media in the workplace or how social media changes society. So I think it's God's providence really, because I can't say like a mountain person I had a plan, but I'd really give credit to God.
Gradually got there.
That's right, and just situationally aware. Really just trying to take my chances in front of me, not afraid of rejection or not as shameful around things failing, because I've had probably way more failures than successes.
So maybe we can get to where Nendo happens, the inspiration. How does this begin? At what point did you feel you were ready to do Nendo?
That's a good question. I think it came for me when I'd been traveling the continent, bringing some pretty big projects in, where I would either take them to agencies like what's now called Arc Africa with Fadi and his team.
Yeah.
So I just walk in and be like, hey, I got this agency gig. It's out of London. It's probably going to need 12 to 25 plus people across multiple countries. It's got branding. It's got photography. It's got creative.
So you were like a deal maker there.
No, I was
an
in
interface.
The project. I was leading the project from the digital and the strategy side. Yeah. But then now I'm like,
looking for production capability.
Yeah, just looking for partners and using a very collaborative mindset. And so seeing opportunities like that, obviously working with ARC, working with others, putting together teams of consultants, and then consulting myself. So it just felt that there's more here than just me jetting on a plane or going to different parts of the continent on my own. And that the continent is sort of opening up in a way where I felt that there were people, and this is still true about Nendo today. We say that, part of the reason we exist is there's a gap for insights about Kenyans, about Africans, by extension, by Kenyans or Africans, from Kenya and Africa, not just jetting in and out, not just, doing it, via ChatGPT deep research out of another city, but genuinely doing that and meaningfully contributing something that's world class from here. That for us is the reason that Nendo started, because I felt that mission is worth starting and sacrificing and contributing to. And I've been excited to see so many teammates come on board since then, and clients.
I mean, there's a lot in what you're just saying that resonates with me, because I remember, like, even when I started blogging, podcasting, analyzing the social scene, analyzing the digital space, it was really, again, coming from that sort of feeling or push to give a local perspective around many of these things, because it felt like the technology story was being told by outsiders as opposed to the locals or the people who are on the ground saying it and kind of like piecing it out. Although, to be honest, I think you've taken it to a whole new level because of it's really very deep research in terms of how you do it. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can see why that was interesting, and the fact that you felt that a gap existed there, right?
That's right. I think it's still there even to this day in part. I think even with AI, which, we might talk more about, I think that the aspect for me that's the most interesting is what we call, or what people call, combinatorial creativity. Is this idea that there isn't that much that's creative. What's creative is the actual combination of disparate or, distant sources to make something. And I think for me, the thing I give my teammates the most credit for and get really excited for, even the clients who've bet on us, is what I call our IP, right? Just these ways of understanding the internet that are counterintuitive, countercultural if you're from the West. And things we've said, which we just used to say in passing, and now we're like, man, that's really huge. Like, for example, we used to talk a lot more about it, the fact that in Africa, the SIM card was your social network, not your email address.
Yeah.
And you have to, I mean, you know this because you were on that, as far back, but this is before Facebook had a mobile experience at all.
Correct.
And that would break people's brains, right? When I'd go and talk about that in London or God knows where I'm on stage at a conference and they're like, what? Or explaining M-Pesa and the fact that, hey, before you whip out your card, I'll have paid for the bill, right? Finding all these ways to help, even today, I think, we talk about social media listening as the stethoscope for digital Africa. There's so many ways. And part of it, like you've said, is the storytelling. How do you get people's curiosity and imagination around an idea? And sometimes that's not just the data itself. It's a story you tell around the data where people go like, whoa, okay, yeah, you're right. Megabytes are like the thing that kind of holds us back from the continent.
Yeah. And also, interestingly, that you point out that same thing, because I remember there was a story about a project that some management consultants or development agency was doing, and they went, I think, into one of the rural areas of Kenya, and they were trying to get these girls to sign up for something, and the assumption was that an email address, only to then have to rebuild this thing around a mobile number. And that assumption is exactly what you're saying, that what works out there doesn't necessarily work here. Yeah, typically.
Yeah, correct. I mean, even if we think back to, InMobi or
the
what have you.
Exactly,
right? You have so many people that have all seen this mobile rise or boom and said, that's the thing to bet on. And so for us, it's saying, okay, if I cannot necessarily make the phones or necessarily, make the software per se, the apps and so on, even though we might contribute to that, how can I then understand the behavior of the person with it? Because that's actually the true currency. In a world where time and attention is finite, but the space on people's phones or the space online seems infinite, then it's actually, how do I figure out how to get you in principle to give me not just your time, but your attention, not just your attention, but the fact that I can get you possibly to care. That is the actual form of currency I think that Nendo trades the most in when we're studying people's human behavior.
Yeah. So obviously there's the point where Nendo started and what it was then, which I think is what you've described. But how has it moved from that point onwards to where we are today?
Yeah, I think Nendo today, we are excited because we can say award-winning, in multiple facets, for the research, for the content, for social and behavior change work, which has become a bigger part of what we do now. Because that has moved us from research where we say, we smell smoke, you might want to look this way, or there's a fire over there, to like, hey, we're going to do something about it. And so even some of the work we're doing now is some of the most ambitious work we've ever done on behalf of clients, particularly in behavior change, tackling some of the biggest issues of our time, like femicide, misinformation, disinformation, violence against women, and then also more commercially related ends for companies with their digital and online reputations. And then the training part for us, like you do training as well. You got two options, right? Do you want to spend part of your time trying to close the sale training, or do you want to just train as a business? Because if there's one thing that Kenyans and Africans love, it's to receive knowledge. At least Kenyans, especially. So that's a powerful place to be, because you have an audience that's somewhat disarmed, and if you do a great job, they're easier to sell to, because you've effectively informed them well enough for them to make confident decisions either on the data and the need, or with investing for sales awareness or whatever the goal is.
What I've found is that training, at least for me and my company, has actually become a massive unlock for business. So like last week I did work, actually no, it was this week, with a development organization, international one, and it was like AI training with their communications Africa team. And it's so funny, but out of that one thing, I think I've gotten 3 calls. They referred me to other people. And now, like, literally, it's like other opportunities to train. But it's all about this idea. They're looking for people who are grounded in, say, the convergence between AI, which you all talk about, but how does that relate to an African or Kenyan context?
Correct.
So how do you bring it home in a practical way so that they can actually utilize the tools in a safe and ethical way, but also without going on the wrong side of some of the internal guidelines and stuff? But the truth, yes, I think for me, it was always interesting when you started Nendo, that I always was like, wow, research, training, agency, like it's kind of unique, isn't it? The model, the way you structured it is very unique, but I can see how the training can play into the other pieces, including, of course, the research and the reports that then become something that actually all work together, right?
Exactly. So we normally say, at least with training, we're not trainers who train. The case studies will show you no one else has at all. Anywhere in Africa, even management consultancies, because we research them.
But they don't do what you do.
Yeah, they don't do what we do. So by the time I come to train you, I can tell you things about your competitors that you'd have to pay someone else to tell you.
Wow.
And then also, I mean, we're trusted with budgets that have to deliver for social and behavior change outcomes or for commercial outcomes. So if I tell you that this is what works, so this is counterintuitive, but it gave us return on media investment for a particular client, you won't find that in a training anywhere else, right? Because we always say Nendo is our own client. So we buy ads too for us, right? To experiment, right? We will do research just on our own, just to scratch an itch that we've got.
Yeah.
So by the time you sit in a Nendo training, I won't lie, some of them cost more than, let's say, other trainings. Same title, but if it's AI or whatever the case may be, we have like... we sort of have the cold face aspect, right? We're not Googling, we're like bringing you insights that are pretty hard to match. And that's the difference, is that they're done from here and
on
hopefully
ground,
at a world-class level if we are living up to our mission.
Great. So I want to switch gears. I want to talk about the Kenyan web and specifically what we get right and wrong. I believe this is a space that you've been talking a lot about. And, obviously when you launched your first trend report, there were some predictions that maybe held true and others didn't. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that and what you saw from that inception point with your first report.
Yeah, so we launched our first report, I believe it's 2014. And we had a number of them. We had a full house of media. I was so glad. Those were perhaps the good old days. We just said, hey, we've got 15 trends about how Kenyans use the internet, and we think you should come and listen to them. And so we had some on social media. They're all going to sound blindingly obvious now, a decade later, but social media and television. And so we called Twitter the second screen for Kenya. And so it's this idea that, like, when you're watching the 9 o'clock news, if you just look at the spike, you look at the level of activity of people not just wanting to see the news, but see people react to the news in real time. We also spoke about WhatsApp as what we call the largest social network in Kenya. Again, seems pretty obvious now, but you have to understand at that point, groups didn't look at all like they did now. It was mainly a chat app. There was no broadcast list. There was no status. Many of the features we know and love. I mean, you couldn't even, reply to messages because they copied a lot of these from Telegram. And so we basically had this roadmap of what we expected WhatsApp to be. I remember multiple brands reading that and saying, okay, we're at, let's say, tier 2 bank on the up and up. We're starting a WhatsApp number.
Wow.
Off of that report. I won't even lie, because I came to find out about this late. Even State House leaving. After that, they started a WhatsApp number. Many of this bank and that, at least State House, had to stop because, of course, the influx of content and comments was overwhelming. But that was people who were like reading and saying, okay, I hear you. All right, watch me.
And taking action.
Yeah, watch me respond this way. So yeah, we don't always get stuff right. I feel like even some of the things we said on influencers at the time, I mean, there were influencers in those days getting paid. I think it's we have it on 30,000 shillings per tweet.
Which is still a lot of money.
That's even today. That's a lot of money. Like I don't know any. Well, let me put it this way. There's not many people getting that right now. It became, because we updated this a few years later. There were people being paid. I think it was like 10 shillings per tweet later. and we predicted that because we said, look, if this doesn't change and particularly the way that people define value, then what you're going to have is it's going to become so commoditized. So when you and I look at the trending topics in the morning, you see radio stations, you see a few people there, but that's a bit of a forgotten relic of how people are trying to remind us that they exist, but they don't work the same way. And honestly, they just get hijacked by everyone else.
So in your experience, what do marketers or brands or even policymakers consistently get wrong about Kenyans and how they use the web and social media?
Ooh, I don't want to upset people.
Well, we're here to talk about the truth.
I think we have this obsession with stats. And that's the thing for me is normally I say, why do you want the stat? Because people will be like, Mark, how many people are on TikTok? And I'm like, okay, I could give you the number, but I normally I'll give you so many caveats. So I think we have this obsession with numbers, and there's a report that we made that ended up really upsetting the authorities, policymakers. But I basically just laid out a bunch of numbers and said, none of these numbers are as reliable. And even some of the methodologies that had been used to come up with this was a number of internet users. So this is like some time back. But I said that there's a lot of double counting. There's a lot of this virtual arms race to have Kenya live up to Silicon Savannah. And then multiple sources seem all to be conflicting each other. This is before Data Reportal and them started doing the same thing internationally. And so part of what we just said is it's the meaning you're seeking to derive. Because for some people, they're using that as part of a fundraise. Right? So I want to raise certain money on certain assumptions. So I know at Nendo, there's times where some of our research will be helping stress test those types of assumptions. Because I'll give you an example. So even with the number of internet users, let's charitably call it 24, 25 million plus. For argument's sake, that's a generous estimate. Now, if we start from there, the big problem that we have with that number is it presumes that everyone has equal access to the internet. It is nothing like that. The vast majority of people are online for very short amounts of time, extremely conservative about their megabytes, and some are just purely consuming, maybe even the majority. And so you and I who are persistently online make these assumptions about the quality, the quantity, and the type of online access people have. So when people ask me, why is Facebook still like so popular in Kenya? I haven't used it in a while. I say, it's not about you. It's about people who need free Facebook every day as their lifeline for comms. It's about people who charge that smartphone and have to pay somebody to charge it. There's still people. Potentially millions, right? If not, like even up to tens of millions of smartphones, if you assume that now a person might have more than one. And that's the reality we're still in, even as Silicon Savannah. But no one wants to hear that. Why? Just give me the 20-something million number and I'll be on my way. But there's so much nuance to it. It's the same way that like even followers, right? Followers, we have 1 million followers. I remember in one of our trend reports, and I did this with, 40-something banks in the room.
Yeah.
I said, raise your hand if you've ever cut a cake when you got to say 10,000 or 100,000 or, 500,000, 1 million likes. I said, that means nothing today. You're not getting even, a single-digit percentage of those people.
Yeah, because organic reach is zero.
And they don't even belong to you anyway. They belong to the organization. It's a badge of honor that means next to nothing. But our obsession with metrics is messing up marketers. And sadly, it's messing up budgets too, because if it's not wisely appreciated and basically the tactics don't match, you can end up lighting your money on fire. And I see that many clients who still do that, and they are years late with certain things that they're either telling the agencies to do, like the proverbial billboard outside the boss's office on the drive to work, as you know, right?
Yes.
Because if I don't look or see like I am marketing, am I really marketing, right? Am I really doing communication?
Or the time when you run a targeted campaign targeting women aged 18 to 24 living in parklands, and then the boss is wondering, why can't I see my ads?
Exactly. So are they really happening? Are you really spending my money? Yeah. And don't even get me started on ad fraud, because there's also some dark arts and jujitsu there. We don't talk about it, but online, that's a big issue too. That there's bogus clicks, there's bogus traffic. And again, when you do the auditing side, like which we do, there's sometimes some really unhelpful or rather challenging. Well, it's helpful, but it's unhelpful to people who think digital is the be all and end all. But like you're saying, I think, going back to the original point, it can be upsetting to find that digital is not this free-for-all nirvana and this sort of heavenly paradise everyone built it up to be. It's still a place where there's certain rules that apply, certain rules that are really old and shouldn't be used anymore, and frankly, where you still need to be wise. You need to be pursuing wisdom, and wisdom in some cases is earned, but in other cases, you can be seeking it out from experts.
No, funny enough, when you talk about the Facebook thing, I remember a few months ago I was at an event actually for one of the insurance companies, and I met one of the Safaricom people, and she was telling us about this dynamic in a sort of a conversation after the main event, that if you go to Shags, if you go to rural Kenya, Facebook is alive and well, and specifically Facebook groups.
Yeah, precisely.
That every village in Kenya apparently has a Facebook group, and that is why they buy those bundles with Safaricom that allow them as a community to even sell bogas and things in there. And apparently that's a dynamic that in the cities we don't even realize. And
Correct.
that apparently is a big part of their business. People who need to be staying active on those Facebook groups. Are you aware of this?
Oh, yeah. We for years have even been challenging clients. For at least the last 5 years, don't open a page. But we want to get on the path to 1 million, or 100,000. Have you seen that other organization? We're like, don't open a page. But we're going to have to open a page. How do you want us to run ads? We're like, do you want to do this the right way, or do you want to do this your way? Because groups here, ever since Facebook initially, following all the blowback from Cambridge Analytica, they had to change. So they changed the feed, started to prioritize people more. So they made changes to the
algorithm.
I remember that,
yeah.
But when there's a point, there was a golden age for groups, where groups, even if you're a brand, it made more sense to open a group because of even the organic reach than a page.
Correct.
But again, this is counterintuitive, right? It doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel natural, right? I'm paying way more for community management than perhaps I was even expecting. But that was the currency. And again, very few brands actually going that way. And for me, there's nothing worse than seeing a challenger brand. You're not anywhere in the top 5 in your industry. Look at the big guys and say, why don't I do what they're doing? They'll bury you alive 7 days a week, right? You have to find ways to be meaningfully different, to be distinctive, and suddenly to just break out of the matrix of what everyone else is doing. And Facebook groups, even till today, like you're saying, we've seen from years ago, we've been talking about F-commerce, similar to what you're saying. I would even put it similar to what I've heard before, which should be from, just a couple years ago, that the size of WhatsApp commerce, Facebook commerce, Instagram commerce alone is arguably, sort of 25 to 50 times whatever you'd call the biggest e-commerce player in our country today, right? And it's just this idea that it's chat-based, group-based, sort of peer-to-peer marketplaces, your, Soko Huru, Soko Mjini. There's all these this network of these really strange-sounding name groups that honestly, there's also scams in there too, as you'd imagine with, enterprising Kenyans. But that's the idea, is that some of these things are happening in places and spaces, even urban, but they're not being discussed as much, and they often go overlooked and underappreciated.
It kind of goes back to this morning. I was at this e-commerce breakfast summit, and I was giving a presentation over there. And one of the things I was trying to point out is that e-commerce actually happens, but not in the way you think, which is somebody's got a TikTok and an Instagram account. They use their WhatsApp for comms and Pesa for payment. It falls out of the structured, organized, catalog-based e-commerce model that we all think Amazon and so forth is supposed to be. But if you were able to measure the sheer size of that thing, including WhatsApp groups, broadcast, status updates, which by the way I found to be incredible for sharing my stories and things online, with more clicks coming from there than from my other socials. Do people realize this?
I don't think so. I think it's, especially for brands, right? I think whether brands or businesses, even from a policy side, it's, the reason that you've been seeing, and I know people who prefer net neutrality hate it, but WhatsApp only bundles or free WhatsApp, so this many gigabytes. When that runs out, you still have your lifeline. You can still access your WhatsApp. And just that as a competitive advantage of some kind. TikTok bundles, the famed 10 shillings for 1 gigabyte of TikTok only data. Again, a massive lifeline for people in the rural areas. Because, like you're saying, something that we have to just keep reminding ourselves is that, Kenya is going to have these, what I'd call idiosyncrasies, small things that are, where we got our peculiar calling
Behavior.
habits, as Michael Joseph once called it, or the peculiar Kenyan, as Sunny Bindra says. And even digitally, we're even more peculiar than whatever we'd see in the material and physical world, I would say.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something that you said a while ago, which is that Kenya has an app graveyard. And that, I want to know whether that view has changed and whether we still overbuild and overthink tech products. And of course, sadly, I think just yesterday we heard about Lipa Later going out of business even after they'd raised, I think, 1.3 billion shillings, which is kind of mind-boggling to imagine just a couple of months later they're down. But can you tell us a bit more about maybe what's happening around this app graveyard situation?
Yeah, I think we said the app graveyard because we saw so many people building apps. Oh, what are you doing? I'm building an app, right? What's the next big play for you and your IT department? We've got an app coming. And the thing that we see brands, businesses, and tech organizations or tech-led businesses struggle with is that, yes, you have an app, but don't be surprised at the churn every month with the number of people uninstalling, because on the hierarchy of utilities, where WhatsApp is highest, and maybe there might be a sort of TikTok Lite or Facebook Lite beneath that, your app is not going to sit in the first 3 to 5. And as long as we can access whatever you have through USSD or the mobile web, it's far smarter to build responsive experiences. And yet there are people who sink in quite a lot into these, flash, whiz, bang type experiences that are amazing. Yes, I'll give it credit. But the challenge that we've seen at Nendo is that the graveyard is full of the fact that even, net on cost, spend, investment, that we've taken years to build this app and roll it out, as opposed to, hey, we built something lean, rolled it out, and are rolling people up as we build features. Sort of your timeless waterfall versus, sort of your Silicon Valley, I'll build it and not they will come, but I'll build it, take it to market, find my early adopters and innovators, and sort of seek to scale again. Exactly. So I'd say that the app graveyard for us just meant that we'd seen people waste millions of dollars on these apps when they should have spread the level of risk out, particularly more on the mobile web and indexing for that, and a solid experience there. I mean, nothing says in principle, and I know maybe Safaricom will disagree, so allow me to, invite that disagreement. It's a podcast after all. But why shouldn't we have a mobile web experience for all Safaricom financial services and other products that works better, if not as good as the app? Now, I know people are going to bang my head against the table, talk about security and so on, but I say that because that might be the missed opportunity. For me, if you had an app alone just for data, I mean, data is a big thing at Nendo, buying mobile data. I mean, one of our reports, we had mapped out, I want to say 300 different ways you could buy data. And let me tell you, Moses, who taught you what a megabyte is?
I grew up knowing, I think.
Lucky you, because for tens of millions of Kenyans, nobody explains it. They pick up a smartphone and nobody explains what a megabyte is.
What is a megabyte? What is the quantification of that vis-a-vis your usage?
And I'll give you 1,000 bob, you'll give me 1,000 bob back. Yeah, we hold that. I send you 1,000 bob, you send it back to me, yes. Someone is going to pick up something for that, the taxman, obviously Safaricom for their fees if it's M-Pesa. But when I give you 1,000 bob and I tell you to buy megabytes, I mean the number of variations of that you can get off of this is staggering, and no one breaks it down. And we've been saying that literally since 2018, that this is one of the biggest problems holding Kenya back even from our digital potential, even in e-government services. Like 3 years ago, we had said, if you're going to digitize hundreds, if not thousands potentially, of government services, you have to take time to educate and inform people on those experiences, because let me tell you, the reason fraudsters thrive, the reason trust is staggeringly low for some amazing digital services, experiences, and areas is because of this lack of education. It's the same way that more taxes will get filed at a cyber cafe than any other single place.
The lack of knowledge, yeah?
That's right. But yet, you don't see cyber cafes branded at that time of tax time in, say, Revenue Authority T-shirts and get called in. I mean, it does happen a bit more now, but we've been saying for years that those are some of the unexpected touch points that go overlooked again and underappreciated, and that's part of where you get your insights. So same for the app graveyard. I think that it's this idea that when you bet everything on an app, typically you're borrowing from a slightly more Western mindset. You've seen these global app in a box, global vendors, Dubai, London, lots of, Singapore, global HQs. You're like, I love the solution. I want to build something like that. I came back from a conference in South Africa, CIO, CTO, somebody saw this. But the question is, have you and I spent time, point any direction away from here, let's go 50 Ks that way and meet people. And when you see how they act, how they use apps especially, you get surprised. We had in one of our reports that there's one player who, in the lending space, the digital and mobile credit space, who was upset that people would uninstall their app. Because the second you uninstall my app, I've lost my line of sight to your data, to your location history, to your call history, your messages, right? All this other data and touch points, the other apps that are on your phone at different times, what you do with your screen time. And they were using all of that to pre-qualify people for loans.
Yes.
And so they were literally like, hey, we will give you an actual incentive in your next loan if you just keep our app on. But they wouldn't, because that's one of those counterintuitive insights where people are like, I use you as a utility. And so that's partly why the graveyard concept comes in, because what other ways will you give people doorways to experience your product, if not an app?
Yeah, I think there's a big question here around democratization of access, right? The fact that when you encapsulate all this in an app, it may not be the most ideal or convenient way for the consumers to explore and discover different propositions. And again, it goes back to the question of what is the future of the web, right? Especially in a market where not everyone has a slick, fantastic, state-of-the-art, brand new smartphone versus a second-hand or lower tier model that won't allow you to run some of the best apps, right?
But every time we meet, my team and I will meet like a C-suite executive. We're always saying, show me your phone. Do you have any other phone apart from this one? Give me your iPhone 16 Pro. Give me your Samsung, Samsung Galaxy 25 Ultra, whatever, bells and whistles. And I'm like, where's your mid-range? Where's your entry-level smartphone?
Yeah.
You need one of those because you need to watch it run out of battery. You need to watch it hang.
Struggling to open an app.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to start proofing your actual experience from there. Because I'm like, now, let me open the dashboard and show you the data. This is how the smartphone landscape looks. These are the top 10. You don't even have anything close to the specs on one of these, but you expect people at that level to use and experience your product. How would you know what it feels like if you can't walk mile in what their thumbs experience, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's normally the counterintuitive part as well. And even light apps. And again, we've been harping on that for a while. If you look at the top, let's say 50 Kenyan-only apps, I dare say one of the biggest challenges is that there's not enough light apps, hardly any at all. I would venture a guess right now that we might not find any that's light. Have you seen a bank with a light app? No. Because you'd have to strip features. And at least at Nendo, we say you need to save people 3 things with the app. Again, this is like, techies will hate this, but I don't have a problem saying it. We've been saying it for like 5+ years. Save people their battery life, right? Save people space on their phones. And save people. I want to say, what's the third one? Gosh, I normally have this at my fingertips. So it's battery life, space.
Probably data?
Yeah, data, exactly. Yeah. So the third is data. So if you save people those 3 things, great. But they come at a big compromise as well. Because the way you like to ship, even this idea of shipping security updates, there are people who the only times they upgrade their apps is when the app is threatening to force them out and saying for security purposes. But my question, when I look at the roadmap and the features, is if you're not delivering utility, why would you push a 50, 60 meg update? People don't like that. The reason that Zenda is as big as it is here, even a decade later, in our top 20, sometimes top 10, is because it's like you have the video, the music video there, it's on your device. Why would you ask me to go stream it and use 80 megs for the same video? I want this video. Send it to me. And many other apps that do that, to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And that's the thing. We still operate in a world where we assume megabytes and connectivity is infinite because it is for you and me. And it's not for the majority of Kenyans.
Wow. And also reminds me of the time when I was doing some work for Opera. And till today, Opera remains relevant for many Kenyans because of the ability to compress data up to 90% so that you can still consume the web, somewhat degraded, but still relevant and allowing you to save on your MBs.
And it's less degraded now. I mean, Opera, in fairness, to the other competitors who are there now have sort of changed a bit of like their hypothesis. They were started as obviously the Norwegian powerhouse that we know them as, got bought by a Chinese conglomerate. And then now you have a suite of other apps and experiences they've since brought. But I was talking in a keynote not too long ago that for years Opera has been essentially paying people with megabytes to start their day with them. Right? That's where the battle got to. Right? We'll give you 3 gigs a month, but you can only use it inside Opera News and Opera Mini, right?
Yeah.
This many 50 megs a day. Start with us, and that's where the battleground is. Even for years, for better, for worse, obviously sports betting companies will read our reports and visit our trainings and so on. But if you've seen a rise over the last 5+ years of many of them offering data-free experiences, a lot of that, you could say it's someone else, but as far as we can tell, that's come off of us talking about the impact of that on the initial user journey, and not just for them, for many other sectors where you're delivering sort of life-saving, life-changing, and important information. You want to eliminate the megabyte barrier there, and we don't talk enough about picking up the tab, right, for the consumer for this to remove a little bit of that friction that's there.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about listening, the social listening to the web, the digital platforms. And you guys are known really at Nendo for, listening around social media. I think many times we've had conversations with you about listening and what you see. How do you define it? Why is it more than just sentiment analysis?
Yeah, I think that social media listening to us is one of the most important things you can do to get what we call at Nendo grounded African insights and trends. It's not the only way, but it's a very helpful data point. The biggest problem we see is that the way that large corporations take what I've just said is they go and buy very big, very expensive software, and they think the job is done the day the ink is dry. Couldn't be further from the truth. That's like buying a Ferrari like we've seen before and driving it in gear 1, or trying to just move it around and it's in neutral.
Wow.
And to them, they think they're actually making progress because it looks nice and they know they have a thoroughbred, with they can tell you all the specs of the engine, but they can't drive it. And so this African information superhighway, the biggest way you participate at Nendo is 2 things. First is what we call understanding a far better view of what we call your branded mentions. Branded mentions is when I say at Moses Kemibaro, tell me when the next blog post is up.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then I'll have misspellings of your names. And if you're not careful, another big issue we've watched brands, and we think the problem is maybe tens of millions of dollars in our ecosystem, fraud, where people cyber squat on names similar to yours. And
Wow.
We see this in telecoms, we see this in banking, we see this in utilities, we see this with a lot of blue chip airlines, blue chip firms. Because if I reach that customer before, especially for higher value items, and their guard is down, the social engineering scams there are so smooth, Moses. And for us, that's another thing. Brands and corporates and even policymakers and the government, especially with all these digital services, forget that fraudsters are following you too. The more you advertise and create an expectation, the more people want you to meet that. And if, at least according to the data we've seen, the brand is responding after 10, 20 minutes, the fraudsters are responding after 1 or 2.
Wow.
And they're saying, hey, DM me. Hey, I have that update for you that you requested.
They're literally fast following.
And let me tell you, millions of dollars are being lost on this issue, and no one wants to talk about it. But it's happening. And guess what? Sometimes the tech and the tools are there. So that's the branded side. The bigger issue that everyone neglects, everyone forgets, but according to Nendo, every crisis starts here, is what we call unbranded mentions. So we take a lot of time and a lot of pride in how long we create what we call our Boolean queries. Many people just put a 1-2 quick line phrase thing. Biggest mistake you can make. You spend, $100,000 on the software, and then you spend 10 minutes on just the query. The query should be a meaty, weighty, large. Should have your competitors, it has your CEO and C-suite's name. It should have misspellings of your product. It should have rivals. So when you take the time to do that, you cast a big net. Because the biggest problem with social media listening, I miss one keyword and it's garbage in, garbage out. So I get 1,000 queries and I think I'm doing great answering them. There were 10,000. I just missed the phrases to find. So any sentiment analysis you run for me on this is flawed. It's false negatives and false positives. So for us, that's why we spend so much time and effort, I think, working in this domain for crisis comms and certainly at least for reputational intelligence, because unbranded conversations are now not where I say at Moses Kemibaro. I say, hey, have you seen Moses Kemibaro's latest post? But you weren't tagged, so you have no idea I said that. And because you have no idea I said that, this is worth its weight in gold. You might want to give me something for this. Guess what happens for brands? Hey, have you seen brand X and what they did the other day? This is where the crisis starts. And what do they see? They see it when it's too late. They see a screenshot and you're being asked in the Exco WhatsApp group, what are we doing about this? It's too late by that point in some cases. And again, biggest mistake you can make is thinking, Kenyans are talking bad. I'm gonna pay other Kenyans to go and talk back to those on all my days. If I could show you people lighting their money on fire, Moses, and I don't know who I need to tell, and maybe I need to talk to the camera, that needs to stop. That's an ego trip. That's one of the worst mistakes you can make. You'd rather even stay silent. And there are times to stay silent. Many times you'd rather say something. We say respond twice, and we have a method for that. But to your point, social media listening is, again, underrated, underappreciated. And sometimes the investment is there. So sometimes we're not trying to sell you software because it doesn't end there. We're trying to take your investment and your tools and help you sweat the asset across different departments. Because we've seen it transform businesses where you say, look, I want to commission research. We're like, hey, people have been complaining about this all this time. And if you see it and you respond, your tech team, your IT team, your product development team, they can have their finger on the pulse of what the customer feels, even before the 1, 2, 3-star reviews come for the app. And certainly before things start breaking. But most people don't look that far.
So in your opinion, who gets it right in this space and who misses the mark?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't want to start to say Nendo's clients, right? Because that's sort of the easy answer I could go with. But I'd say, okay, let me put it this way. Social listening doesn't work for every category in every sector. So that's also why for Nendo, we do like offline research. We do focus groups, we do door-to-door, we do, phone call surveys.
So you actually use different methodologies as well outside the tool.
Because if I put all my chips in on social, I would also lose my mind and I'd be misinforming some of our clients. Sometimes you have a very vocal minority. And yes, that could be the canary in the coal mine. But there's other times where, and we've seen this when we're called in for like a crisis, you map out the full business portfolio, and you go like, hey, guys, why are we being necessarily, say, quiet here because of this issue? The business is still going on. And then you go out of town, you talk to customers, and you find that some of them are like, yeah, that we've seen or heard that, but that hasn't changed our behavior yet. And so we can over-index. In fact, for me, when we normally look at how at least CEOs look at X, they significantly over-index it over the size of its audience and even its actual impact. I think it's been deteriorating in impact. So even with our social listening, X is the easiest data to find, but we'll always look up YouTube. We'll always spend perhaps 2 to 3 times the time on TikTok because those are the places that are harder to get the data from. But you get more meaningful and richer data from more Kenyans that gives you the ability to go offline or to balance out what's being said, and also checking for what we call the sort of thumbs for hire. So I'd say that in terms of who's getting it right,
I don't think you have to be specific to the brand. I think the idea is that, maybe what are the key factors to getting it right or wrong? Maybe that's how you could frame that, perhaps.
I think the factors to getting it right and what we've seen brands who want to get it right do is, I'll be honest, one of the toughest things is being less, at least in crisis, for example, being a bit more responsive, particularly with approvals. When we ask whether people have done what we call fire drills, right? You'd be so surprised how even some of the most mature brands that you and I use every day or interact with every week are a little off step or a little behind with the clearance you need from a legal, corporate affairs.
The amount of time it takes to actually start resolving the issue.
Correct. And even is that lean working team there, and are they in sync with someone at the C-suite to at least have that sort of the lines drawn? Yes, people can drop an escalation matrix. I can do one by hand now, but that's not the answer. The answer is the fire drill aspect of saying this issue has happened. And at least with social media listening, we can go back and we can take our pick in banking, in insurance, in telco, in sort of blue chip areas where, and I'll give an example. For us, since the June protests, we've seen such a souring of sentiment. You talked about sentiment earlier. Social media sentiment, particularly negative sentiment towards large brands And institutions in general, government institutions, non-profit institutions, development partners. Generally, there's a David versus Goliath battle that says, hey, we're going to fire first and ask questions later because we're going to support the individual even when they don't necessarily have a case against the institution. And so we're trying to tell people, don't take it personally and try to just be better prepared, because that's one of the best things you can do to tackle what's happening online nowadays.
I think for me, one of the things that comes to mind is just thinking about the fact that even recently I was running a couple of workshops, and they all, when I brought up the issue of social media crisis, all of them, in fact, when I ask them, usually when I do the training, I start off the conversation with, okay, what do you want to get out of this? And out of something like 14 responses, crisis was like 7. It's like half of them. And they're like, I want to know how to deal with crisis, because we are literally week in, week out in a crisis. And unfortunately, many of these organizations, the posture they've adopted is silence. They get hammered, they go quiet. They don't say anything because the approvals, the structure of some of the organizations, some of them are government. It has to go through the spokesperson. But as you said, by the time you're even trying to respond, the crisis has died down, the damage is done. I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
It seems to be a common problem. And even I've seen when we tell clients that you need to invest in a social listening tool, when they see the numbers, because they're always expensive, let's be honest.
That's true.
It's seen as a cost rather than investment. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, true. I think for me, sometimes it's a balance between, like you've said, do I buy the tool? Because in some cases, just quickly, like the investment in the software means for me to sweat the asset, I actually need to cost share that across several departments for it to make sense. So in our experience, we lobby and we sort of do some of that legwork to just help it make sense as an
So
investment.
people have value across the board.
Oh yeah, they have to, right? So, and there's
It's
a
not purely
training.
a marketing cost, yeah?
Exactly. In fact, the times that we've been most successful, years on end, whether banks, telco, wherever, is when that's the case. There's a multi-departmental effort. And of course, one of the challenges today is that different departments now are all getting their own software. And sometimes there's one that'll do them all. And so we often are just trying to come in and just provide advice, right? Even if we have no horse in the race. But to your point, if I decide that I don't want to buy social media listening software, I just want access to the insights. That's also an option, right? That I can purchase these reports in an ad hoc way or predictable, reliable way. And then I'd say back to your initial question on crisis, that it's terrible to sort of be watching a train smash happen before your eyes.
And it's happening.
Watch the damage and then just sort of say, we'll pick up the pieces and we'll just keep the trains running. Because in some of those cases, the question is, what did we learn from this? And you'd be surprised how clear we found the answers are already in the room. And sometimes it's not just the senior leaders. You ask some of the actual folks on the team.
Yeah.
And they have answers, they have suggestions. So honestly, sometimes we're just a mediator or an interlocutor between people in the same organization who just don't meet and have structured conversations about their situation. And we can give them data, and obviously we give them advice, but you'd be surprised how much wisdom is in those rooms, even as they call in an outside expert to give them advice in the moment of crisis. Because according to Nendo, the first 72 hours are the most important.
Critical,
and I'd argue even the first 48. But people take too long. And like you're saying, they let the damage happen, assuming it'll blow over. And sometimes it does. But if I show you your brand health metrics, if we go offline, get other data points, then you look at that and say, okay, this might not have been worth ignoring in this way for as long as we did. And sometimes, even if you're ignoring, let it be among 6 decisions where you make an active decision and it doesn't just happen by circumstance.
Yeah, I think it's really sad. And I think, I've watched this for years and, it's just painful. Like even last week, I think in one of those sessions, some lady was saying, look, we know this issue will happen every year because it's an environmental factor to this particular thing. We know it's coming. We, as comms, we put it out there. And then the leadership team is like, well, just let it happen. And I don't know where that attitude comes from, the apathy, but this is the environment we live in. I want to talk a little bit about the currency of megabytes. I think you've already alluded to this already, and also the 5 S's of internet, which I believe are 2 things that you've picked up in your trends. So tell us a little bit about megabytes as a type of economic currency, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think what I mean is, according to Nendo, for us, let's take the example of Netflix. So Netflix's CEO, senior leadership have long said, we don't compete with Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, we compete with sleep. That's the only person that we compete with because we're dominant, we're growing, we're thriving, and we are just going to try to keep you there a little longer with, are you watching? What does that assume? It assumes that the battleground is now time and attention. And then it assumes, most notably and most inaccurately for our part of the world, that the megabytes, the connectivity is constant.
Constant, affordable,
Correct.
widely spread, yeah?
So Nendo was tracking for years when the only country in the whole world where Netflix was free was Kenya.
I remember this.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was a very specific option. It was trying to, again, do what we've said here, where we say, look, let's take out the recurring subscription and price. Let's just allow you an Android, standard definition, phones only, limited catalog, just get into the Netflix train. We'll pick up as we go. And even that was brought to an end later, partly because I think in our part of the world, if you look for what other streaming services, Showmax, for example, there's others too, you need to give me the power to decide how many of my megabytes I'm going to spend. I'm not just spending my time and attention. And that's not just true here. It's true across the internet and the web. It's true with light apps, with the fact that, right, in some cases, the Facebook app, the big blue app, the second I see someone with an iPhone, I'm like, you don't care about mobile data. Mark, what do you mean about that? I said, do you know how big the Facebook app is? Like 100 megs. No, think higher. 200. No, 300. Yes, but it used to be half a gig. You've not even opened it. Half a gig you've parted with. What some people use in a month, Moses. Just to have the app, right? You go to Android, the regular app. How big is that app? 20 megs. No, think higher. 30, 50 megs. But they have Facebook Lite, which is how big 1 meg. It comes down to megabytes, right? So we don't talk about that, but that's a secret currency holding Silicon Savannah back from achieving its potential, and the whole continent, really. And that's why the biggest growth that's come the last few years has come on the back of free data. Because now they've said, let's compete on time and attention, but we'll pick up the check for your megabytes. Sports betting companies are saying that. Facebook is saying that. TikTok is saying we'll give you 1 gigabyte of data and pay for it and give it to you for 10 shillings. So it won't be free, but it'll be as close to free as possible. And that's the battleground. That here you have a hidden ceiling that stops people where you're like, I have this app. And I remember we were talking about the customer journey with one organization, and we told them for experiential, just have a MiFi there. Let it just be roaming, and you want your activation team to help people install it as they walk through another experience. And that's how you get more installs. Again, that's sort of using Y Combinator, do things that don't scale. But it was this way of delivering an experience that helped people care enough to open the app, at least start by downloading it.
Yeah. And what about the concept of influence? How African users consume, behave, and engage online?
Yeah, I think the 5 S's is a really great way to think of that one. So for us, it's if you give, let's say, a Kenyan, a Moroccan, a Tunisian, South African, Namibian, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Ivorian, Burkinabe, whatever, like pick someone across the continent. At least we validated this over the years. We've had time. There's what we call the 5 S's of the internet. So expect them to do these 5 things, whether you give them 100 MB or 100 gigabytes. So the first is search. No surprises. Google most visited website. We'll spend less time there on that. But Android, preeminent in our ecosystem. So when I see people over-index for iOS, sometimes I go like, hey, you should, how many devs you've got, how much, those hours are going to iOS versus Android. And then you have the app graveyard we talked about. So just thinking through the fact that if you have other channels, go for that. But sports betting is the thing we don't talk enough about.
Oh, man.
Yeah, because
even this morning in the thing I was doing, like the number of betting websites on the web that were in the top 20.
Yeah. And we've been talking about that again for like 7+ years, where for us, even the most Googled word of the last 12+ years is one of 3 sports betting websites, period. Not
in the entire country.
In the entire country. And let me put it to you this way. The most Googled word in the US and the UK is the word weather. Here, it's a sports betting company, not just betting, a specific company, right? And so while it's changed, that's our ecosystem, that nothing is searched for more on the number 1 website most visited in Kenya than sports betting. Now
Wow.
let that sink in, because that is the second of the S's. And the more you look down the top 100 sites, which I know you're looking at as well, the more you see not just sports betting platforms, you see sports betting odds related websites. You see websites that help you keep up with leagues in Thailand and Taiwan and Australia and the US, like all these things that are
Then
basically
betting predictions and all that.
exactly,
Yeah.
because it's an ecosystem where, and that one is not just using time and attention and megabytes. Sports betting is using your income and finances and earnings.
It's consuming your money. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is a recipe for what potentially could be a public health crisis in future years. Because in some of the estimates we've seen, we could be talking about double-digit millions of dollars on the lower side being bet every month here. So we're talking tens of millions of dollars bet in aggregate, or more than 1 million shillings an hour at if you're not looking up as high as 10.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And part of it is escapism. Part of it is like, there's many things. I don't want to sound like I'm, judging in a case, right? People can bet or gamble responsibly, right? And there are aspects to that, but it is a massive pastime. The third is social. So that's TikTok. At least for us, what we've been tracking is TikTok is on track to pass Facebook. Either, what we'd say, next year, most likely, or the year after, for the number one platform in the country as far as user base. Now, of course, the Chinese, to be quite clear, don't necessarily disclose in the same way, even though they are great commercial partners here for advertising. And Meta, of course, sometimes you can say a country like ours is a bit of a rounding error. If you look,
The grand scheme of things.
South Africa is twice our size.
Yeah.
Nigeria is like all Kenyans put together are still fewer than the total number of Facebook users in Nigeria. But that's the social side. The S was for adult websites, which are always there as well. The fourth S, so that's often something there. And look, if
That nobody talks about.
Nobody talks about, right? But when you look at parenting, you look at families, you look at access to tech, there's a whole conversation that we just do as CSR around that goes extremely undiscussed, right? People say, no, I want my kids to be tech savvy, etc. People are rolling back so many of the ed tech conversations that were had because of the distractedness, the material, challenges in cognition and learning that are being brought about by persistent access to devices, that you don't be surprised if people start essentially rolling those back, moving away from free laptops towards just the bare bones
I'm a
basics.
parent and we're seeing this, and we see that there's the EdTech, for all the promise it had, not to mention the fact that once you put the screen in their hands, you don't know where else they might go off to.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I'm not, an advocate for parentware, that's just there to help. But in some cases, it does help. You've got Family Link, you've got Apple Screen Time. So that's there. Even illegal streaming. We often talk a lot about that on the Nendo side. The aspect of paying for streaming. We've seen the most crazy workarounds around piracy. And again, what we're just talking about here is, again, the fact that megabytes matter, right? So people are saying, I'm paying with my megabytes and connectivity. Why do you want me to pay on top of that?
But don't you think it's kind of hilarious that when you look at the top 100 rankings, that I think YouTube is right up there at number 2?
Yeah.
And we're always talking about data by megabytes and data, and yet the highest consumers of megabytes are the most popular consumption behaviors?
True. I'd say YouTube it's bigger than, I'd say, if I'm not mistaken, TikTok, I think, might be bigger than YouTube.
It might have taken over. But for the longest time, it's always been like number 2, number 3. Yeah?
Correct. No, but now we're talking even in users as opposed to where it ranks, because you're right, it ranks higher because you have a TV aspect, you have a cyber aspect, you have a desktop,
all the
laptop.
Different places,
whereas TikTok is very much vertical video on phone. And
highly snackable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Short form video. But YouTube is where people are watching the 9 o'clock news. So when you look at the most searched for things on YouTube every year, you're going to see, TV stations and news in the top 10, right? And that's fascinating to us because it just says that that's such a big pastime. Is we've moved, to digital broadcasting, but even the search data tells us that people are searching to watch at least the 9 o'clock news. People say that TV is not as big, but the data that even other research firms will tell you, radio and TV are having record-setting years, like the last 2 years. And that data isn't even popular. Like right now, as Nendo, we have campaigns and work happening on, people are like, oh, but you guys are digital guys. Yes. But we care about effectiveness on the research side more than we care about digital is a hammer and everything is a nail, right? So we have radio, we have TV work, because the idea with that is you do what's effective, not what feels like your pure specialty. You expand to suit that.
And I think people forget, if you think back to the average Kenyan, the Mwananchi, right? They're not sitting there doing everything online. They want to turn on the phone, put a little bud in their ear, and they're going to listen to their favorite Kikuyu radio station. And that doesn't require megabytes.
Precisely. You've hit it. You've hit the nail on the head. When I turn on the TV, I don't pay with my megabytes. I now have my time and attention as the currency.
So that still matters, especially when you leave these ecosystems of the bigger cities and towns where bandwidth is more available, and in many instances in a cafe or a school where you get it for free, essentially, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, that's something that I think we should always have in the back of our minds, that there's a huge swath of Kenyans who are just not always online.
Correct.
For free, you know?
Yeah. The last S quickly is just stories. And that one, I think you talked about opera. The big thing we've been talking about the last couple months is how, you know, the way we say Airbnb, biggest hotel, no rooms.
That doesn't
Uber,
own anything.
Exactly. Uber, biggest tax company, no cars.
Yeah.
Well, what if I told you that there are hundreds of millions of Africans reading stories that are tailor-made for them, but the apps and organizations don't publish a single word?
And who'd that be?
That's Opera News. That's Scooper News from Transsion. That's Phoenix Browser and dozens of others. Many of these websites, Moses, I'll show them to you. You've never heard of them. They're not in the 100 most visited websites. But I show you some of the numbers these guys are doing. They are staggering. And that's the idea. They are creating essentially an algorithmic news feed, even inside the Opera browser itself, Opera Mini, that you and I aren't even clued into that much. Why? Because you and I use Chrome. We
don't exist in that ecosystem.
Exactly. And we don't have the screen size that they're targeting either, right? You're double D, I'm big time, all of us, big sort of type phones, fancy, like tech, but they are literally like, for me, if you think about 2027 elections or just the future of our information ecosystem, there are unseen hands from China and different parts of the world that have greater sway than whoever I'm using my remote to reach or whichever websites I'm going to read.
But doesn't it come to this situation of what we call these pre-installed apps? Like, let's say today you buy an Infinix, you buy a Techno. What's your first on-ramp when you get there? What is popping up on your screen? It's probably not going to be your standard Silicon Valley app.
Correct.
It's going to be what that manufacturer prioritizes, the browser they recommend, the e-commerce solution, the apps they think you should have, and suddenly you're switched on to those things because they're there already.
Correct. And that's how Boomplay is bigger than Apple Music, bigger than Spotify, bigger than SoundCloud, bigger than AudioMac. Probably all of them put together times 2, and they're not even scratching the surface.
Why is this not common knowledge? Why don't even agencies know this?
Honestly, I think because we get comfortable with the information that's in front of us and we don't think to question it. Moses, let me tell you, that's why I started by saying the biggest mistake I see is people put such confidence in the million, in the number, and in what feels it's a Western insight, has no bearing on our part of the hemisphere or our part of the globe. And someone will say to me with such confidence, even about AI, the number of I wouldn't even say the one that I don't like, but the number of talking points I hear that are just not what that person is saying. You've talked about the most visited websites. We might not have time today, but ChatGPT is the 3rd most visited website here. People don't understand why, and they haven't mapped out where. If I show you where, I'll overlay a map. These are all the searches for ChatGPT of the last year, how it became number 3. Then I'll overlay a map of all TVET institutions and universities.
The geographies.
And your eyes will just light up. Right?
So it's guys in educational institutions.
Precisely. And your freelancers and many others, right? Knowledge workers, right? But even everyday people are experimenting with that. But again, everybody stops at, I have the start I wanted, I'm leaving, but nobody questions. And that curiosity is one of the biggest competitive advantages that brands and organizations are missing out on today.
Yeah. So we're kind of going to get a little tight on time here, but I want us to go a little bit forward into 2 key areas. One is, thinking about new frontiers, right? AI, fraud, TikTok, misinformation. As bite-sized as we can be, what's happening there? What should we be looking at?
Yeah, I think for us with AI, it's still to some degree what I'd call a problem in search of a solution. I think there's some meaty, weighty digital problems I'd love to see AI solve. I'll give you one that we've just been tossing around in the office quite often. USSD menus. Yes, I hate USSD menus. say to the guy, I do not like USSD menus. And I can't wait for someone to use, let's call it generative AI, to move me from this many screens and this order to pop something up for me, right? SMS, give me the same flow somewhere, some other way. And yes, people have spent the last easily 25 years learning these actual USSD star, this, that hash. But I give an example of that because USSD is a bedrock, a foundational institution in African internet and mobile, culture.
Yeah.
But it's broken, in my opinion, because you have dozens of these very complex trees and no one yet has started the process of saying, why is it this way? In a world where we have large language models, we've got DeepSeek if you don't want, and you can bring it offline, train out the sort of Chinese aspects out of it. And so I say that because there are meaty, weighty problems like that. But I think we still solve very surface level problems, and yet there are significant ones there that I think can unlock revenue, capital, and resources for everyday people in the time and effort they save, and for brands in the friction that they remove that ends up hopefully leading to more sales and profit. So I'd say, like, at least with AI, we have probably hundreds of use cases, examples, either from our research or just our brainstorming around marketing and what we think is broken that we think can work. But again, we don't always have, I guess, the time of day to bring them to life, but we're constantly thinking from an African and nuanced perspective on that.
Yeah. What about the TikTok issue? Anything there that we should be looking at going forward?
Yeah, I think with that, what we've always been saying as Nendo is that the rural and peri-urban users are the most underappreciated. And let me tell you, Moses, they're running laps around people. We're on a podcast now. Moses, there's podcasts on TikTok. We just don't. You don't call.
We
that
don't
person.
belong in that ecosystem.
No, but they don't think of themselves as podcasters. But they're podcasting, right? And they are live, and they have dialogues, and they have matchmaking,
and they're doing live selling and live shopping.
Pop the balloon. There are people who are romantically matchmaking every day. I mean, as we saw also in the big BBC expose not too long ago for TikTok, there's also some
porn and things happening.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and we've been knowing that again with our 5 S's. You look at things such as
which actually begs the question, right? What about the whole thing about the fact that it seems, or it would appear to be, that TikTok is not regulating or somehow managing this questionable content as and when it happens on the platform?
I'll give credit to one of the first people who blew the whistle on this. If you look up Odanga Madung from Odipo Dev, friend of Nendo and so on, and obviously friend to the two of us, there's a report that I think he did that looked at how the TikTok Lite app was missing so many guardrails on its own. Again, you go back to compared to the main TikTok app.
So the controls and all weren't there.
The controls were just not there at the time, right, when that came out. And there's no telling whether they were fully resolved, but some of those are some of the ones you see later that you look at some of the proclamations on TikTok's response to this BBC Africa Eye expose, a number of them there are answering even some of the issues there around parental access, around caution for you've been on for so long, breaks, stopping minors from accessing for longer periods of time. Because bear in mind, TikTok used to be this app called Musical.ly, right, before ByteDance bought them, and so it still has that teen lip sync music cultural aspect to it. But like I said, I think the biggest question of the future of our internet ecosystem is that if TikTok becomes bigger than Facebook here, it will be the first country. Well, I beg your pardon. Uganda, it's bigger. But Uganda is bigger because in our observation and experience, Facebook, because of the social media tax, because of Uganda's particular social media shutdowns and other challenges, Facebook has a sort of strange relationship there where TikTok, for instance, is significantly bigger than Facebook, even though you could argue there's arguably a number of people that are online, but VPNs make some of the data unreliable to measure in exact terms, because we at Nendo call Uganda the VPN capital of East Africa, right? Your border guy, every ordinary
so they're still
person.
there, but they're using VPNs.
They're using VPNs, and so they look like they're in the Netherlands and Hong Kong.
And of course, they're getting
US.
billed for their social media there as well, right? It's built into the mobile bundles that you pay for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. And what about, when you think about TikTok in terms of the data apparently that's come out that Kenya, I think, is one of the world's highest at TikTok utilization. I don't think in actual numbers, but in behavior terms. Is that correct?
So I have massive problems with those types of headlines, because I think whenever, and I might be wrong about the one you're referring to, but sometimes I'll say, sometimes we're on a bit of a fishing expedition with some of the sources and some of the rigor behind that research, right? Because when we look it through apples to apples, there will be other countries that just walk all over us, either in, and that's why we go back to the first point around megabytes and time, because TikTok is a video-based social network. Even if you crunch and compress that, how much? It's video based, and video is not everyone's cup of tea, especially when I'm outside the guardrails of, I'm outside of the 10 shillings for 1 gigabyte of TikTok only data. At that level, there are people participating, streaming, interacting, really looking to TikTok. I've been surprised, particularly at streaming and selling. I get very excited with the e-commerce sides of what's happening there. But when we compare ourselves to other parts of the world, anywhere that TikTok shop, for example, is there, I'm gonna have serious issues with that type of data when you say Kenya is the top X. Because even when you look now at just mobile telephony or speed and many other metrics, there will be other signals that point to that. And I just hate to say that I'll scrutinize this maybe off air, but I always question that, because it's always a very sexy headline, but you go beneath the surface, you check the rigor of the research, and you'll find contradicting points or caveats and so on.
I mean, even this morning when I was doing this e-commerce thing, I was like, look, guys, those numbers are wrong. I don't know where they're getting them from, but we know that the numbers are bigger than that. We know the numbers are lower than that. And there's this sensational headline and reading stuff, which is designed to simply get attention. But I really do feel we're coming to the end of our time here. And maybe, again, in bite-sized, Mashinani Mavens, tell us a little bit about that. It's something you've talked about. And also the algorithmic newsroom and zero-click realities.
Yeah, so I think Mashinani Mavens is just our word for rural and peri-urban TikTok. So your Kikuyu talk, your Kamba talk, your Luya talk, Somali talk, Mijikenda talk, right?
All living within TikTok.
Exactly. And they have, similar to what you talked about with the Facebook groups, you've got Kijiji Live, you've got the ups and downs, you've got drama, you've got key personalities who are beefing, who are together, who are, and so you have that at a microcosm level.
Almost like a soap opera type of thing.
Precisely, just with all the ups and downs you can imagine now happening in a language you and I don't understand. Right?
Actually, a friend of mine was telling me that his mother is over 80 years old, and her and her Chama ladies are like TikTok addicts now. And they watch other ladies who are doing things like Christian content, music, stories from the village in their native colloquial traditional languages.
No, correct.
On TikTok.
I mean, when we did our big trend webinar in December 2024, looking to trends from 2025, one of the ones we've been keeping close tabs on is there are people who've turned the camera around on their grandparents.
Yes.
And now making them the celebrities and the stars. Up country.
Here in Kenya?
Yeah. There's even one who, when it was time for her funeral, you should have seen the people who came out. Right?
No way.
Yes. Yes, because she had been, for some people sitting in the city, they've lost that connection back home in some way.
So she's now a movie star.
And let me tell you, not just her. And look, let me tell you, India is the only country in the world, as far as I know, but there's others, where there was a massive banning of TikTok, right? That followed the whole, geopolitical tension with China and India. And you should have seen what, the regrets people had before. Of course, they've since resolved, but there were housewives being made into like national stars. On TikTok in India. So trust me, the same thing is kind of happening. It's just that they might not be people who you and I recognize. But when I look at the top, even TikTok says, oh, these are rising creators. I discovered a gentleman there. Everyone thinks when they think cooking, they think Dennis Ombachi, what have you. It's a gentleman called Simple Yemi. Again, he might not be known to this room, but the guy is killing it. You look, out of town, you go further out to sort of Eldoret sides, you've got Mini Chips, right?
Yeah.
The visual artist, right? And again, there's a screenshot we have of hers. She's doing double-digit million views. And again, everyone is, overlooking, underappreciating her and others, right? Because that's the challenge, is that the decision makers in the air-conditioned boardroom in Nairobi are saying, I don't know this person.
They're out of touch.
Right? The agencies are saying, I don't know if this, this person doesn't. And truthfully, they might not know how to do like a detailed social media report of their participation in the campaign.
But they've got the influence, they've got the following.
We've just done a campaign right now, a behavior change campaign, 300 plus influencers. And the majority, we've had vernacular ones there, even just this morning. Vernacular, big, national radio interview, right? With a content creator talking about one of the most important, topics for men right now. And I say that because that's one of the interesting aspects of it, is it's these, again, underestimated, overlooked,
Unknown.
because they're not Nairobi or town people, but they have this aspect of knowing my smartphone, my front-facing camera is literally my ticket out of this. And that's why the third most desired career choice after being self-employed or in business for yourself, tied with being a doctor, is TikToker.
Wow.
In Kenya. And that's Gen Z's. That's from April last year from Odipo Dev and African-centric. But we're in a renaissance time, I think, in Kenya, and it's something we're going to keep tabs on at Nendo.
Wow. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this algorithmic newsroom concept you're talking about and the zero-click realities. What's happening there?
Yeah, I think that's tied back to that aspect of you can do things in the newsroom, but you are no longer the person who determines your path to the reader.
Oh.
Yeah, because when we go back to Scooper News, Phoenix Browse, and all of this, you're competing against people you don't even know. They are 1, 2, 5-person outfits that are just churning out content. And in a world with ChatGPT, they just have an inkling of something that was happening in a Twitter thread or like a little beef on Instagram. And they turn that into a piece and they're fleshing and publishing that. And so,
Where they're publishing it?
So they're publishing it under your Opera News, your Scooper, your Phoenix Browse.
Or they've got like a citizen journalism capability of some kind?
Not even that. They've started their own websites that you and I might not be familiar with or choose to read, but they have their own steady audience, and the bulk of their audience will be seen through these apps, which are not even sending the traffic through to them, but they're holding some of the content on there.
Or the discovery happens via those platforms.
Correct.
Okay.
Discovery and distribution. So the idea there is that going into the future years, yes, you have your nation's, obviously still a big visited website. We see all the data from SimilarWeb or SEMrush. Like, I know you look at it too, but you have these upstarts. And not just the two cores and the like, but basically I'm always looking at some of those websites and I'm like, where did these guys come up with it? And some of it's clickbaity, but it's got an audience and it's got people clamoring for it. And that's the idea that, again, you have unexpected people you're competing with. Kind of the same way that around the pandemic, you looked at the gossip ecosystem.
Yeah.
And now we went from sort of Gafla to Edgar Obare and a couple others like that.
Yes.
And he, again, he's not everyone's cup of tea, but what he did there and has still done with these little Telegram bots that will confirm your payment by card or M-Pesa and let you in to sort of his ecosystem. I don't know many newsrooms that have done something like that from a tech perspective, right? With capturing recurring payments or providing gated access towards communities and content like that. So I say that because these things are happening before our very eyes, but most people overlook or don't even find them.
Wow. So it's almost like internets within internets.
Exactly.
And the thing is, you can be totally unaware that within that sort of microcosm that something is actually happening and is huge there, but because you live in the Chrome ecosystem or the Google ecosystem versus the Scooper News or Opera ecosystem, you have no idea.
Yeah, even for me, generationally, I'm always trying to get Gen Zs to put me on because I'm realizing even my age, needs to sort of like stay sharp. So you do a lot more listening, even though, of course, today it's a lot of talking.
Oh my God, algorithmic newsroom. Either you know or you don't know.
Either you know or you don't know.
Wow. And lastly, the zero-click realities. What's that?
Yeah, that's just the idea that like the last decade, you and I have probably made a living as, running two different, agencies. You do digital, maybe even more digital marketing than we do because we do research and sort of the other stuff as well. But there's this idea of, hey, I need traffic to my website. That's my objective. So I'm going to give you budget. I'm going to give Nendo budget. And for years, one of the things we've asked on the research side is why don't people click? And that's why I talked about ad fraud, because sometimes there is ad fraud happening even in our part of the world. Even sometimes it's a problem. Google, Meta, people will confess there's junk traffic that's been there for years, and sometimes, of course, people don't acknowledge that percentages of online spend will be wasted or will be used up to this, right? And sometimes agencies just aren't honest about the state of the problem. But the zero-click world says that now the platforms are deliberately changing their business model to compete against AI. So let's give an example. Google, their job, they invented the phrase pay-per-click. But when you and I search for things now, we get something called AI overviews. Those are stopping you and I from clicking. That's them taking money out of their own pocket to give that AI overview. And for the first time in Google's maybe 30-year plus history, they finally disclosed how many trillion searches happen every day because people started thinking that ChatGPT is catching up and becoming, thanks to search, bigger than Google, which is nowhere near close. They're not in the same stratosphere. However, in Kenya, because of where ChatGPT sits, it is one to watch because there's a generation of people that might turn to that or Perplexity or other platforms. And so Zero Click basically says that if Google is willing to sort of consume its own money to the detriment of its own business model of over 30 years and a big share price, well, now let's look to the rest of the web. If you're writing a newsletter nowadays, it's better to give the payoff in the newsletter. Why? Because that aspect of making me click and go to get the payoff, it's a bit fractured or changing, even with people's time and attention. If you're writing a thread, don't try to pull me out. Give me the full thread there.
Exactly.
Right? If you're doing content on Facebook, there are people who just won't click out. Why? Because as you and I have said on the podcast, free Facebook means if I click on your ad, you're going to take out of my megabytes.
Exactly.
Even though you have something good for me, I might not do it now. I'm not ready. Commercially, I don't have the airtime to even come and engage there.
Yeah,
so give me more of the payoff on my side. Explore pushing me into Messenger, right? Which is another Facebook place where the experience can still happen without charging me megabytes.
Zero click,
and so
wow.
it's changing this idea of how we define success across these platforms. Even a place like Instagram, it's always been unfriendly towards exporting or
they want to keep everything on platform.
Exactly. So they don't hide it. But these other platforms are not telling you that this is the way that they're changing, and now they're punishing you for leading people out. Even LinkedIn. If you've seen the phrase, link is in the comments, that's because somebody has said, here's all my content. But if I put my link in here, LinkedIn might give me a little haircut on my reach. So I'm going to comment to myself. And my comment is where you find my link.
I mean, I've seen this trend, and this is why, as you know, I've been blogging now for 17 years. And I've had this wonderful blog that I pay every year for. I pay hosting. But here's the painful truth. The traffic has been declining for years. The content is brilliant. It doesn't work. But here's the funny thing. Exact same content, put it on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I publish it natively. I also automatically get a newsletter generated out of that content. That newsletter is growing at a rate of 500 new subscribers a week. I don't pay for visibility. I just keep it on platform. I do the same on Medium. I do the same on Substack. I even post full blog posts on Twitter, which is kind of messy, but because it can and I pay for it, I do. But exactly what you pointed that I think the idea that I think brands and even individuals need to realize you need to stay on platform because that's the new consumer behavior. Or rather, it's been that way for a while. And people are not clicking out. Algorithm doesn't want you to click out. And it's all about staying native.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yeah.
And so that's a zero-click concept.
That's a zero-click concept. And
Wow.
it came from some guys at a company called SparkToro.
Yeah.
But in our part of the world, it finally explains something we've been seeing as Nendo, like you've said, for a while, where we wondered why, right? Even so, you change your client campaigns, you change some of the objectives, you have people take a deep breath and challenge them that, hey, we're going to tell people that they need to search for it on their own, and we'll try to meet them at different points in the customer journey. But you have to rethink what has been basically bread and butter. It's become one of
Forever,
the 10 commandments of the last
Create
decade
the
on digital.
intentions, send the traffic over. So now keep it on platform.
Keep it on platform, exactly. And you'll get better payoffs and reach, even though in some cases you'll feel, maybe a heart attack or a racing heart because you're like, but where's the traffic? I want people on my side.
I mean,
and it's not that simple.
Depending on the length of the podcast, I've posted full podcasts on TikTok and they get good traction.
There you go.
A full podcast. So there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark, I think it's been incredible. I feel like we still need another hour.
I hear you.
And I would love to hear any last thoughts, any nuggets that you think our audience would really appreciate and value.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big challenges I'll just frame for the audience is if you're based in our part of the world, our hemisphere, question everything.
Don't assume.
When people tell me about Gen Z this and Gen Y that and Gen X that, I say those are American
reading.
concepts.
Yeah.
Don't give me that, mindlessly. Think about our part of the world. And when you do, you get so surprised, pleasantly and unpleasantly, by how little might apply or how many insights you'll get that are unique to our continent or our part of the world. So for me, with the metrics and the stats, give those a rest and just stay curious, stay humble, stay hungry. I think that no matter how digitally savvy you are always in pursuit of running, whether you call them tiny experiments or at least just saying, maybe I don't know. Even people who say they make data-driven decisions, we have a certain exercise we do. and we ask them, and you should hear a pin drop. Like I do this, with CEOs, senior leaders, senior marketers, because they say that they make data-driven decisions. And I hate to say it, but sometimes it's a lie, because they make gut and perceptive decisions, but they disguise them as saying data. And so things like that, where we challenge and say, where's your data from?
Yeah.
Because if it's not earned from our part of the continent, yes, a lot applies here. But we are generating our own insights, and too few people take the time to go find them.
And I think for me, I've just been very fortunate. I think possibly the mere fact that I'm also a content person, in addition to running an agency and doing business, but the things I see for myself as a practitioner are always sometimes like really shocking. Like this thing I just told you about, 500 new subscribers, no ads, nothing. It just happens. And it obviously is the dynamic of LinkedIn being a social media as well as a content distribution platform. I think another thing that people need to start paying attention to really is this whole story around the AI moment and what this means going forward, including what you just said about, Perplexity and possibly ChatGPT replacing Google. I know people who have literally stopped using Google for search.
Yeah.
Perplexity is their go-to platform. They even pay for it, and that's it. End of story. Done and dusted.
I mean, that's we have a whole kitty at Nendo just dedicated to paid AI tools of all kinds.
Yeah.
And the idea is like, hey, well, like make your experiments on company time, because we're like, let's challenge ourselves. Even just this morning, I shared with my team, because I'm part of like a working group in AI with some other people in different parts of the world. And yesterday we had a call, and what one of these guys was showing me with Sora, he's basically a bit of an influencer, so he gets a lot of like access and invite codes.
Okay.
So Manas, all of that, the stuff that's hard to get access to now, he's in there. And what the guy was showing me, I was just like, man, I don't know how much time our old business model has, but as long as our clients continue to, sort of pay the piper, I think we have a chance. But so much is changing. And for me, you have to take the time to experiment and explore. That's the mindset to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone just really needs to go back and challenge their preconceived notions about what the internet and social media is. Also, the arrival of the interest graph, courtesy of TikTok, where it's no longer about how many followers you have. It's about how interesting your content is and whether that actually connects or vibes with the people who consume. But honestly, we needed another hour. Unfortunately, we're kind of at the end of it, Mark. It's been such a privilege and a pleasure. I'm seeing a part 2 of this coming.
I can imagine.
And I think it's because both of us are kind of like really passionate about this stuff. But thank you so much for joining us. And I can't wait for us to have a follow-up conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And for anyone who's looking for some of these insights, they can visit nendo.co.ke, our blog. We publish as much of this for free as we can.
Yeah.
Even our very randomly updated Substack, and even our TikTok finally is getting some live.
Yeah.
Thanks to
nice.
one of my thanks to my teammates. So I've got a couple of them here behind the camera. So I think it's been exciting for us to do more storytelling and sharing some of the wisdom and insights we're earning. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. So there you have it, Mark Kaigwa, one of the legends of digital in this part of the world. Lots of insights unpacked here, lots of future trends coming forward. But I think one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is Mark really telling us to challenge, our preconceived views and notions about what works and doesn't work from a digital perspective, and always being curious and questioning what is coming at us so that we can really find and unearth the truth behind what of these things that come to us from different sources. So once again, thank you for joining us for this conversation, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next one.